sorry we had to interrupt our talk last time, as I had received some catastrophic news of a shootout in which a particular friend and his son, they were shot at. The main person died, but by mother's grace, the young boy, he was shot in the leg, and 2 bullets have been removed. He is in the hospital and he is coming round. So I felt I should mention this. And before I start our discussion, to sum up what we had started with, before coming to the announcement of the supreme secret, Lord Krishna gives a kind of recapitulation of the main teaching of the Gita. First is the enigma of human action, how when one withdraws one's active preoccupation with affairs of the world and attains to a certain inner passivity, there is a withdrawal, a disinterestedness in action. But the Gita's whole gospel is on active participation in the world, explaining how that is to be done. The Gita speaks of 2 natures, the lower nature constituted of the 3 gunas, modes, which holds most of us in its grip, and the higher nature, Paraprakriti, which is above the operation of the gunas and which one discovers to be none other than the power of God. There is also mention of 2 selves. One, the mutable, the moving, the active self, which is the Kshara, and the immutable, impersonal self, which is called the Akshara. So one has to pass through the rule of the lower nature and the Kshara Purusha before one can attain to the status of the higher Prakriti, higher nature and the impersonal self. And the process, at any rate the central process towards this end, is of renunciation. The renunciation which is emphasized not outer, which is sannyas, but an inner renunciation of ego and desire. That is called tyaga. The Gita openly accepts the superiority of this inner withdrawal, inner renunciation to the external form. And after one attains to the impersonal self, the Vedantic status of a kind of oneness with the Brahman consciousness, which is above, which is not involved, which is impersonal. The Gita goes a step further and points out that this is not the ultimate. The Brahma Bhuya, becoming Brahman is not the ultimate. There is another step, and that is to attain oneness with the person, the transcendent person, Madhava, my status, my state, my consciousness, the Purushottama. So beyond the personal, beyond the impersonal is the transcendent Purusha, of whom both these selves are complementaries. And in attaining the status of the transcendent Purusha, necessarily there is first the loss of ego. Unless you diminish the action of ego progressively till you eliminate ego, you cannot station yourself in the impersonal self. As long as the ego is operating, you cannot acquire the consciousness of the impersonal. That calm, that silence, that peace is above the action of ego. And to discriminate, to reduce the power, the influence of ego, to separate the ego self from our true self. The Gita speaks of the yoga of buddhi. Buddhi is understanding intelligence, understanding will. Not just a will, but an understanding will. And this, when you operate this will, exercise this will, buddhi, there is first the element of discrimination between the true and the false, between the transient and the permanent, between the ego self and the true self. And once you discriminate, you exert your will to shape the legacy of ego. There are many who understand what is what, who understand, know very well what is right and what is not right. But many lack the willpower to put themselves on the side of the right. Under some plea or other, they shirk the choice. But where the yoga of buddhi is practiced, there is that will. One should perceive what is right. You choose that. The willpower operates not only in the mind, but the emotions, in the vital force, in the vital region, and even to a certain extent in the physical. The Gita repeats again and again that by the practice of the yoga of buddhi, you attain to the Purushottama, who is beyond the impersonal. And the attainment of this status in the transcendent is not the fruit of knowledge. Knowledge helps to a certain extent, takes you to a certain height, but thereafter to merge your consciousness with the consciousness of the Supreme person, Purushottama. What is required is devotion. Unless there is a spontaneous flow of the being towards its master of being, unless there is a kind of evolution of surrender to the divine, no amount of knowledge is productive. Knowledge can give us a map, but to traverse the distances, it is only by the leap of the heart that you can do it. So the Gita lays extra emphasis at this stage on the necessity of bhakti, and it asserts that bhakti completes jnana. Devotion, love, is the culmination of knowledge, because the highest knowledge reveals to you that the Supreme Lord and your own self are not two different entities, but you are only a fragment, a portion of the Supreme Person. And a link is established for interchange, first at the level of emotions, and as the purification proceeds, at the level of psychic interchange, the inner soul, and this leads to a fruitful union, not a dry annulment of oneself, but a living union between the human and the divine. We have spoken of knowledge, spoken of devotion, but action, activity continues. In the Vedantic solution, activity is put far behind as not relevant or pertinent to the new status. But the Gita is emphatic that action is done, continues to be done, but with a different motivation. As one looks upon oneself and feels as an instrument. First step is to do the works of the sacrifice, not for the satisfaction of ego or desire, but as an occasion for consecration. That's the first stage. The second stage is when you realize that you are not really the doer, you are not really the sacrificer, but it is nature, Prakriti, that does the works through the operation of its modes. The next third step is when you realize that this active nature, Prakriti itself, is only a frontal aspect of a higher Prakriti, which is unmoved above the operation of the gunas. And that is the Paraprakriti, the higher nature, which you realize to be nothing else except the power of God. This nature is not something different from the Lord, of whom it is a power. There is a good deal of controversy of whether the jiva, this evolving soul, when it unites with the Lord, it disappears. Or does it continue? There are schools of philosophy, attitudes of yoga lines, which says that once you unite, you merge. The drop is absorbed in the ocean. There can't be an individuality for a drop of water which joins the sea. That is one position. But both Sri Aurobindo and the mother are emphatic that the jiva, being an eternal portion of the Lord, cannot eliminate itself. It continues its individuality, not individuality, its individual status, even when it merges into the Lord of all, as a center, as a particular center which had been emanated for a particular purpose. Mother asserts more than once that a soul spark which has been emanated with a purpose can never be cancelled. It has to be, it has to continue to be in whatever status. And the Gita supports this position, saying that what takes place in the union is not a negation, but a fulfillment. The purpose for which the spark was issued, emanated, that is fulfilled. When after a long series of experiences, steps of evolution, richer for the attempt, richer for the journey, the enriched soul unites with the master of the being. So we can't say it is a merger. If it is a merger at all, it does not affect the individual formation. It continues maybe as a center, maybe as an individual focus in the oceanic being of the Supreme. How does he act? A person who has attained this, or a person who is on the way to this fulfillment. What are the standards? What are the laws to which he subjects himself? The Gita points out that all our dharmas, standards, laws are ego-based. They are governed by the three gunas. Analyze any law with which the human society governs itself. You will see the operation of the three gunas. Even when one speaks of the impersonal silence, very often it is a cloak for a tamasic lethargy. One doesn't want to act. One doesn't want to exert himself. So one speaks of impersonal silence. So these standards are under the drive of gunas. The true law, the true standard is the greatest self, the greatest spirit, not man-made, But on the way, the sattvic regulations, the laws, which are the operation of the sattva at its highest, they bring one to the threshold, as it were, of the supreme law. Sri Aurobindo cites the example of the Mahayana Buddhism, which requires the practitioner to renounce desire, to give up attachment, and yet to have a compassion for humanity, for the world, for all orders of creation, and action in the spirit of that compassion. That is the teaching of the Mahayana. He also cites the instance of the Tao, the Chinese Tao, which is an eternal, that supports everything. The whole nature, the whole universe is ultimately that, which cannot be spoken, which cannot be described, but which is nevertheless the ultimate. It is, in a sense, what the Upanishads describe as the asat. You cannot define it. Asat does not mean non-existence. It means an existence beyond all formulation by the mind. It is the supreme all, which means nothing. In practical terms, it means nothing. Thus, even the highest peaks reached by the sattvic mode in the Mahayana, in the Tao philosophy, they fall short because they give you the realization of something that cannot be defined or described. But what is? There is something. And that is where the Gita comes to a transcendent reality to which the soul surrenders. And the Gita sums up this discipline by defining first Atmani, in the self. Realize and station yourself in your real self, Atma. And then Atho Mai, then in me. You cannot lodge yourself in him unless you first recover your own status in your highest self. The highest self of each one is not the ultimate. It is the highest as far as this formulation of the universe is concerned. But of its own existence, there is the transcendent aspect. And when one attains unity with that, as a result of utter surrender, on a surge of love, even when the ego dissolves, the spiritual individual, the jiva remains, because it is an eternal portion of the transcendent power. And the transcendent cannot be abolished. The transcendent is not something vague in which all the jivas are absorbed or merge themselves. This triple status of the reality, the mobile, the immobile, and the transcendent, and the necessity of the evolving soul to pass through these gradations step by step is a feature of the affirmative philosophy of the Gita. Is Gita the final word, you may ask? We may at once say that at the level at which the human mind had arrived at that stage in the history of mankind, the gospel of the Gita was indeed the highest. But it is not so, and it is not expected to be regarded as such. Thousands of years thereafter, at least 3,000 years, when the human consciousness has grown enormously, new vistas have opened, and there is a natural enlargement of the vision, an expansion of consciousness, and that is where the affirmative note of perfection of life, of the integration of all the life values in the truth mind and the truth knowledge, build the knowledge power of the truth mind becomes relevant, and Sri Aurobindo supplies that dimension of the possibility and the certainty of the truth consciousness, taking up all the past stages of evolution in itself and leading to a new order, a spontaneous order of the truth and the right. But before one can arrive at that, an utter surrender to the highest is necessary. As long as you keep a single line of legacy of the past, the full truth cannot reveal itself. And that's the supreme secret of a joyous surrender to the Lord of oneself, the Lord of the being, the Master of the universe, the supreme reality. That is the note to which all these 18 chapters in the Gita lead, and I think we will be able to discuss that in our next session, where man is called upon to give up all man-made standards, human standards, and surrender to the Lord. It is to His will. That is the highest level. The chapter opens, the Gita opens with this confusion of standards. Arjuna is bewildered because there are so many standards claiming his allegiance. And the last chapter opened after it has prepared his understanding, given him a visible proof of the universal presence of God, the representative hero, the representative human, is called upon to give up all the standards and trust to the highest, the standard of the divine being. ultimately, that is what the mother also says in a different language when she is asked, when we do not know what course of action to take, when we are confused, when there are conflicting claims, what do? She says, what leads you to the Lord, what leads you to God, that is your dharma, that is good. What retards, what holds you back, that is wrong. That simple barometer, how easy it looks, how difficult it is obvious to those who seek to practice it. Because everywhere there are veils of ignorance, veils of ego, which confuse the mind. But that's a subject that we will be touching sometime later, after these discussions on the Gita are completed. Meanwhile,